Do you believe she comprehends even a single word coming from our mouths? Trent made no effort to speak quietly as he grinned maliciously across the dining table. Derek laughed in response, saying, I seriously doubt it, but listen, an $800 million acquisition for a speechless Japanese figurehead? I'm willing to accept those terms without hesitation. That's the way this whole situation began. A private business dinner valued at $800 million, hosted in San Francisco's most elite rooftop dining establishment, offering sweeping vistas that extended across the entire bay. However, what was intended to be a momentous business alliance transformed into something considerably more repugnant. An unvoiced conflict filled with meaningful stares, quietude, and bigotry. Positioned at the table's head was Kimiko Hayashi, a Japanese technology mogul who had constructed her enterprise from nothing. Her quietude wasn't a sign of frailty. It served as her protection. She refused to communicate in English this evening. Not due to inability, but because she chose not to. It functioned as her shield. Standing behind her, going undetected and invisible, was Naomi Brooks, a young African-American server with a slender build, almond-shaped eyes, and the bearing of a ballet performer. She wasn't merely replenishing wine goblets. She was observing every detail. Each statement, each subtle slight, each offensive remark muttered as though it were inaudible. However, Naomi caught every word. The sneers, the condescending finger-snapping address to sweetheart, the racial undertones, the reduction of Kimiko to merely an exotic barrier in their path to domination. What followed wasn't simply a business turnaround. It was a revolution masquerading as restaurant service. This isn't merely another power struggle at a conference table. This represents a black narrative. A narrative concerning the undervalued, the disregarded, and the formidable silence of women who declined to be eliminated. And when Naomi finally spoke up, she didn't merely interpret. She completely overturned the entire situation. Therefore, before we explore what occurred that evening, the agreements, the deception, the respect, ensure you're subscribed to our channel. We present narratives like this weekly. Narratives that remind us the most subdued voices frequently possess the greatest impact. Because occasionally the individuals you dismiss most are those rewriting the conclusion. Remain with us. You'll definitely want to listen to this one. The establishment was named the Palisade. Situated on the uppermost level of a glass and metal structure in San Francisco's downtown area. It wasn't merely a dining location, it was a declaration. The crystal fixtures didn't simply hang, they flowed downward like crystallized waterfalls. The stone floors sparkled beneath gentle golden illumination and offered a view. A complete 360-degree vista of a metropolis constructed on determination. Within the exclusive dining area reserved for this gathering, the environment was thick with privilege. Expensive dark wood panels covered the walls. An elongated curved dining surface of buffed walnut mirrored the soft candlelight glow. The aroma of prepared duck, truffle essence, and costly whiskey lingered in the atmosphere. At the table's far end sat Derek Caldwell, chief executive of Valensa Biotech. Towering, wide-shouldered, wearing a custom charcoal suit costing more than most individuals' monthly income. His smooth-back fair hair and precisely timed smile belonged to someone who consistently anticipated victory. Next to him sat CFO Trent Langley, more youthful, more astute, more ambitious. His attire was more somber, his timepiece more ostentatious. If Derek ruled the conference room, Trent served as the enforcer. United, they resembled predators in human form, calculating, restless, and completely certain of their superiority. Opposite them sat the woman they assumed they were about to defeat, Kimiko Hayashi, a billionaire in her own capacity, founder and chief executive of Hoshiko AI, the Tokyo-headquartered innovator in robotic surgery and neural connection technologies. But this evening she remained the enigma in the space. Her hair was gray, carefully arranged. Her gown, a rich navy silk, moved like motionless water. No accessories, no cosmetics, simply her aura, serene, indecipherable. She remained silent. Her assistant, positioned slightly behind her, provided gentle interpretations when required, but primarily Kimiko observed. Her silence caused the men to become agitated. And naturally there was Naomi, the server. Nobody paid attention. Moving between dining surfaces, modifying wine quantities, removing dishes. Her identity wasn't recorded on the invitation list. Her voice wasn't present in the space yet, but her gaze was. She observed Derek's patronizing smirks. She noticed Trent's anxious leg movement beneath the table. And she watched Kimiko, composed, majestic, maintaining her position in a space designed to make her feel insignificant. The opposing sides were established. The space appeared luxurious, but underneath the exterior, something more frigid was brewing. This wasn't merely a dinner. It was an examination. And none of them realized who was being evaluated. Not yet. The initial toast felt uncomfortable. Derek raised his whiskey glass with the assurance of someone accustomed to establishing the mood. To international partnerships, he declared, and to a tomorrow where knowledge recognizes no boundaries. He grinned broadly as though he had just presented a statement deserving of publication. Kimiko merely acknowledged, raised her glass quietly, and took a sip. No statements, no interpretation. Trent leaned closer, murmuring, was that agreement or merely courteous acknowledgement? He didn't make much effort to speak softly. Kimiko said something in her native language to her assistant. The gentleman, without expression, addressed the table. Ms. Hayashi values the gesture. That was everything, and that became the routine. Derek would present lengthy, animated presentations about the revolutionary potential of combining Hosoku Ai's surgical robotics with Valence's worldwide distribution. He discussed figures, schedules, market dominance. He grinned between statements. He gestured as though directing an unseen crowd. Kimiko would respond with a brief phrase, soft and controlled. The assistant would interpret. Consistently in a single statement, consistently impartial. Trent's tolerance diminished initially. He moved closer to Derek and grumbled, "Are we honestly bargaining with a sculpture? This is ridiculous." Derek maintained a courteous expression, whispering in return, "It's traditional. She's executing her strategy. Simply remain patient." However, Trent wasn't designed for patience. He snapped his fingers toward Naomi, not even glancing at her. "Listen, sweetheart, more of that wine. We're going to require it." Naomi experienced the sharp pain behind that term. Not the demand itself, the manner, the familiarity that wasn't deserved. The way sweetheart seemed more like a restraint than a compliment. She served the wine without uttering a sound, her movements controlled, but her attention was focused. Subsequently, Trent reclined in his seat, rotating his eyes as the assistant translated another careful response. "You realize," he stated loudly, "we could likely just substitute her with an automated system. Would receive more engagement." Derek chuckled. Naomi observed Kimiko's expression, still serene, but something in her gaze altered. A flicker, an injury being acknowledged, then concealed again. They weren't addressing her. They were speaking past her, around her, through her. They perceived a communication obstacle, but they didn't recognize what that obstacle revealed about them. To them, Kimiko was an issue to resolve, a person to transform, an identity on a document. To Naomi, she appeared like something entirely different, a reflection. And she could sense the pressure building. The space wasn't merely becoming colder. It was fracturing. Naomi Brooks had always understood how to become invisible. She was educated, not explicitly, but through years of subtle teachings. In educational settings where she was the sole black student, in shops where she was monitored, not welcomed. In job interviews where they appeared friendly but never responded. In this establishment, she was unseen by intention. It was portion of the preparation. Flawless service. Silent footsteps. Gaze lowered, movements swift, never communicate unless addressed. Make them feel important without ever being noticed. However, Naomi didn't constantly exist in the background. There was a period when her existence was abundant with vibrancy, texture, and music. Kyoto, Japan. Her mother had served as a diplomat stationed there for almost 10 years. Naomi had experienced her developmental years walking stone temple walkways, pursuing cicadas in the summer warmth and creating paper birds in a peaceful classroom with children who never questioned why her appearance was different. She mastered Japanese before she learned cynicism, before she learned to recoil at assumptions, before she comprehended what it signified to be different. The language remained with her, not merely in recollection, but in inflection and intuition. She recalled the significance of the expressions, the rhythm of respect embedded in each statement. She remembered the bowing, not simply of the physical form, but of purpose. That existence had once belonged to her. Then came the return to America. Then came the understanding that being proficient in Japanese was more remarkable when stated by someone who didn't resemble her. That her narrative wasn't fascinating enough. That her intelligence would constantly be questioned because she didn't resemble the ideal representative of achievement. Currently at 24, Naomi was managing multiple jobs, educational loans, and unspoken aspirations. She maintained 2 positions to afford education at a fine arts institution in Oakland. She created artwork at night, drew during train journeys, and served wine with a grace that originated from recognizing her value, even if nobody else in the space did. However, that evening, something awakened in her as she observed Kimiko Hayashi endure the veiled insults and theatrical courtesy. Naomi didn't merely see a reserved billionaire. She saw someone fighting the identical quiet battle. Someone who possessed authority, but was still being disrespected because of her accent, her gender, her silence. And Naomi recognized that silence completely. She'd worn it like protection for years. But tonight, that silence was starting to break. The discussion, or what remained of it, had started to deteriorate. Derek leaned backward in his chair, his fingers tapping against the table like he was awaiting someone to signal the following scene. Kimiko sat motionless, peaceful, collected, responding to each inquiry with a few exact words through her assistant. Her silence was consistent, her tone respectful, but to the men opposite her, it was maddening. Eventually, Trent exhaled audibly, threw his cloth napkin onto the table, and leaned forward with a sneer. "We desire to purchase your company," he stated, emphasizing each word like he was addressing a child. "Do you comprehend?" Derek laughed, not because it was amusing, but because he believed he was in command. "Perhaps we should retrieve some educational cards," he added, his voice saturated with condescension. Naomi almost released the decanter in her grasp. Her back was facing away as she stood near the serving area, pretending to review the wine menu, but her ears burned. Her fingers clutched the counter's edge. It wasn't merely the ridicule. It was the tone, the assumption that if someone didn't communicate like them, they were somehow inferior. Kimiko blinked once deliberately. She didn't flinch. She didn't retaliate, but the atmosphere in the space shifted slightly. Trent smirked again. "I mean, honestly, is this a business transaction or a silent performance?" And then came the ultimate insult. Soft but cutting. "I promise, man," he muttered to Derek, not realizing Naomi was merely 5 feet away. "This is like bargaining with a miniature tree." Derek chuckled, silent, ornamental, probably more ancient than it appears. Naomi turned around deliberately. Her heart was pounding, not with fear, but with rage. She glanced at Kimiko, still unreadable, still composed, but Naomi noticed the tiny alteration in her jaw, the quiet storm behind her gaze. Then Naomi felt a touch on her shoulder. It was her supervisor, Foster. "Don't become involved," he whispered. "You communicate only when addressed. Perform your duties." She nodded. But something within her had already broken free. Kimiko spoke in Japanese, a phrase not interpreted by her assistant. Not for the men at the table. A whisper almost to herself. Naomi heard it distinctly. "Is there nobody here who perceives me?" And immediately, Naomi understood this wasn't merely cultural ignorance. It was deliberate. It was systematic. And she could no longer remain quiet. The space had entered a strange type of stillness. Trent had reclined, obviously satisfied with his miniature tree remark. Derek was pouring himself another measure of whiskey, displaying the smug expression of someone who believed he had just completed a transaction. The assistant, always professional, sat quietly, and Kimiko, she hadn't moved. However, then, softly, she spoke again. A statement, just one, not for interpretation, not for the men. It was directed into the space between them, as though she were projecting her voice into a valley and hoping someone, anyone, might respond back. Naomi heard every sound. "Is there truly nobody here who perceives me?" The word struck Naomi like a string resonating deep in her chest. It wasn't merely the meaning. It was the pain behind it. That type of sorrow didn't originate from weakness. It came from being eliminated in clear view. Naomi stepped away from the wall. For a moment, her hands shook. She could feel the weight of protocol gripping her, the fear of termination. The warning from Foster still fresh in her ear. But that one statement, those few gentle words from Kimiko, made every regulation she had ever followed feel impossibly restrictive. She moved toward the table. The sound of her shoes against the wooden floor resonated in the sudden silence. Derek glanced upward, annoyed. Trent scowled. Her supervisor was frozen in disbelief. Naomi didn't stop. She approached Kimiko's side, bowed deeply at the waist. Not the shallow acknowledgement of customer service, but the deep formal bow of respect. A bow reserved for seniors, for teachers, for individuals whose presence carried significance beyond words. Then slowly she straightened, looked Kimiko in the eye, and spoke in clear, fluent Japanese. "Hayashi-sama, I am profoundly apologetic. I understand I am not permitted to speak, but silence in the presence of this type of disrespect is its own form of betrayal. If you will permit me, I can assist. Derek dropped his glass against the table with a hollow sound. Trent's mouth opened, but nothing emerged. The assistant blinked, amazed. Kimiko's eyes expanded, not in surprise, but in recognition, like someone stranded at sea, finally detecting a beacon through the mist. She reached forward, gently touched Naomi's arm, and whispered back in Japanese. "Thank you for perceiving me." And immediately, the power balance in the space shifted. Naomi hadn't merely spoken. She had transformed everything. Kimiko leaned backward in her chair for the first time that evening, her gaze never leaving Naomi. She gave a subtle nod. It was not merely permission. It was confidence. Naomi stepped forward. Her voice, steady now, filled the space like a current of clarity. "Hayashi-sama has requested that I interpret her statements going forward," she said, directing her words to Derek and Trent. "She believes it is time you comprehend the complete significance of what's being communicated." Trent laughed anxiously. "Certainly," he said. "Let's listen to it." Naomi turned back to Kimiko. They exchanged a brief statement in Japanese. Measured, deliberate. Then Naomi turned toward the table again, her posture straight, her voice calm. "She would like to commence by discussing the modified contract you presented tonight." Derek reached into his briefcase and slid the leather portfolio toward Naomi. "It's all there," he said. "Clear, direct, more than generous." Naomi opened the folder, examined the first few pages. Her pulse quickened, not from fear this time, but focus. She wasn't an attorney, but she had spent enough evenings helping her mother review diplomatic documents to recognize certain patterns, language that sounded generous, but had sharp edges. She turned to Section 7B. Her eyes paused. "This provision," she said slowly, "grants Valencer unlimited rights to renegotiate all intellectual property licenses post-merger. That includes the surgical AI Kimiko Hayashi personally developed." Derek blinked. "That's standard merger language." Naomi shook her head. "No, it's deliberately ambiguous. It allows you to sell off her patents. Strip the core technology without needing approval." Trent waved his hand. "It's a protection just in case things change post-acquisition." Naomi didn't even look at him. She continued turning pages. "Section 12, she said, her tone becoming sharper. "This is a non-compete provision, but it's written so extensively, it wouldn't just prevent Ms. Hayashi from launching a new tech company. It would prevent her from consulting, teaching, speaking at conferences. For 10 years. She looked directly at them now. "You're not just trying to purchase her company, you're trying to eliminate her from the industry." The silence that followed was heavy. Derek's jaw tightened. Trent muttered something under his breath. Their confidence, their smug control, it was slipping. And Kimiko, she hadn't said a word, but her face held the quiet satisfaction of a chess player watching a checkmate unfold, one move at a time. Naomi had cracked the code, and now the trap was wide open. The air in the space had become motionless. Trent fidgeted with his pen. Derek cleared his throat, his eyes darting to the window as if the city lights could offer him an escape. But there was no getting out of this. Naomi closed the contract folder slowly, her hands precise, her eyes unwavering. And then Kimiko spoke this time. Her voice was soft but carried a new kind of weight. She gave a single instruction in Japanese to her assistant who nodded without a word. From the inner pocket of his jacket, the assistant produced a small silver device. It was sleek, no larger than a phone. He placed it gently on the table and pressed play. Initially only static. Then came Derek's voice, sharp, unmistakable. "Let's just get to the final offer. Cut out the incentive clauses. We'll absorb her executives. She'll never know the difference." Trent's laugh followed, full of teeth. "She's lost in her own little world. We feed her whatever we want. The translator does the heavy lifting." The audio was clear, damning, echoing against the expensive wood and glass of the private dining room. Naomi didn't flinch. She translated the essence of what had been said. Even though the meaning was painfully obvious. "They assumed she didn't understand," she said. "They joked about manipulating the terms. They laughed about silencing her team. They made a plan to dismantle her legacy in front of her, banking on her silence." Trent stood abruptly. "You can't record private meetings without consent. That's illegal." Naomi turned to him, cool and steady. "So is fraud." Derek stayed seated, but the color had drained from his face. He looked at Kimiko. Really looked at her for the first time. She wasn't small. She wasn't silent. She was a fortress. And she had just opened fire. Kimiko didn't smile. She didn't need to. The recording clicked off with a final metallic beep. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was judgment. A verdict. Naomi folded her hands in front of her. Her voice was low but strong. You didn't just underestimate a woman. You underestimated the wrong woman. And you forgot that silence doesn't mean surrender. This wasn't business as usual anymore. This was war. And Kimiko Hayashi had just won the first battle. The door burst open. Naomi barely had time to turn before her supervisor stormed in. His face was red with fury. Foster was usually cold, composed, the kind of man who spoke in half sentences and raised eyebrows. But not tonight. Tonight, he looked like a man seconds away from exploding. What the hell was that? He hissed, stepping past the stunned executives, ignoring Kimiko completely. His voice was low but venomous. You left your station. You inserted yourself into a private meeting. You spoke to a guest. Naomi stood still. She didn't speak. She didn't flinch. You're done, he snapped. You're finished here, Naomi. I don't care what the excuse is. You're fired. Immediately. Trent scoffed in the background. Finally. Something this place gets right. Naomi clenched her jaw. Her hands stayed by her sides. But inside, her chest burned, not with regret, but with something sharper, something heavier. She had done the right thing. She knew it. And this was her reward. Pack your things, Foster spat. Security will escort you out. Naomi was about to reply. She wasn't sure what she would say, but she didn't get the chance. A deep voice cut across the room. Actually, she's not going anywhere. Everyone turned. A tall, sharply dressed black man stood just inside the open door. Early 40s, clean-shaven, calm as a surgeon in an operating room. He wore a navy suit that didn't try to show off. It didn't need to. His presence said everything. Marcus Jones, he said, stepping forward. Executive Director, North American Innovation Alliance, and one of the key financial partners behind Hoshiko's expansion into the U.S. Foster blinked like he'd been slapped. Derek's face turned a deeper shade of gray. I've been sitting in the main dining room for the past 20 minutes, Marcus continued, watching this unfold, listening to that recording, watching how each of you behaved. His eyes locked on Foster. You're not firing Naomi Brooks tonight. In fact, she should be getting a formal apology. Foster opened his mouth, but no words came. Marcus turned to Naomi, and for the first time that evening, she felt truly seen, not as staff, not as background, but as a person of value. You were the only one in this room who understood what integrity looks like. Naomi's throat tightened, and the balance shifted again, not because of rank or money, but because one voice had the courage to speak, and another had the power to make sure it was heard. The private room was quiet now, still charged, but no longer tense. Foster had backed away, his shoulders stiff with humiliation. Derek and Trent sat silently, their power drained, their arrogance turned into something almost pitiful. And Naomi stood in the middle of it all, her apron still tied neatly around her waist, her posture unchanged, but everything else about her had shifted. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the woman who had changed the course of a multi-million-dollar deal with her voice and her courage. Kimiko turned toward her for the first time all night, her expression softened. She spoke gently in Japanese, her words elegant and measured. Naomi listened, her chest rising and falling with each syllable. Then she turned to Marcus, translated softly, and gave a quiet nod. Marcus stepped forward. Miss Hayashi has a request, he said, addressing Naomi directly. She would like to formally offer you a position with Hoshiko's global strategy team, not just as a cultural liaison, but as an executive assistant, someone who understands the unspoken, who listens between the lines. Naomi blinked. She wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. You'd be based in San Francisco, Marcus continued. You'd help lead our U.S. expansion, advise on international partnerships, and oversee future diversity initiatives within the company. He paused, letting that settle. Your tuition covered, any graduate program you choose, anywhere in the world, fully funded. You'll have housing provided near our offices, and a starting salary that reflects the value you've already proven you bring. Naomi felt her breath catch. The floor beneath her feet suddenly felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. This couldn't be real. Kimiko stood. She crossed the room slowly, meeting Naomi face to face. She didn't offer a handshake. Instead, she reached out and took Naomi's hand gently in both of hers. You saw me, she said in soft, accented English, when no one else did. Naomi nodded, her voice caught in her throat. I'd be honored, she finally whispered. Truly. Kimiko smiled. Then come with us. We have work to do. Real work. And just like that, the door that had been closed her entire life wasn't just open. It had been blown off its hinges. A new future was waiting, and Naomi Brooks was finally walking through it. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within 48 hours, news of the failed negotiation leaked. Not from Kimiko, not from Naomi, but through back channels in the tech world that had a life of their own. The recording, discreetly shared with legal counsel and a few key partners, found its way into the hands of corporate oversight committees. Valence's board acted fast. Derek Caldwell was asked to step down voluntarily in a closed-door meeting that lasted less than an hour. His golden parachute was shredded. His name was removed from the company website by noon. Trent Langley resigned 2 days later, citing personal reasons. But everyone knew the truth. Investors were rattled. Stockholders demanded answers. And the press, well, the press had a field day. The story was simple but powerful. 2 wealthy white executives caught on tape trying to manipulate and erase the legacy of a foreign female founder brought down by a black waitress who simply told the truth. Headlines didn't need much help. From server to savior, the woman who stopped an $800 million power grab. The internet called it poetic justice. Comment sections filled with praise for Naomi Brooks, for Kimiko Hayashi, for the simple but radical act of speaking up when it mattered most. As for Derek and Trent, their reputations were tarnished beyond repair. Doors that had once opened automatically for them now stayed shut. Invitations to speak at conferences were quietly withdrawn. Future partnerships vanished like mist in the morning sun. They had underestimated one woman's silence and another woman's voice, and in doing so, they reminded the world of a truth they had long forgotten. Real power doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears an apron. And sometimes the people you never thought mattered are the ones who change everything. This wasn't just a story about corporate betrayal or a surprise twist in a business deal. It was a story about visibility, about dignity, about what happens when the world assumes silence means weakness, and when it dismisses people because of how they look, where they are from, or the uniform they wear. Naomi Brooks was never just a waitress. She was a young woman carrying years of lived experience, a deep understanding of culture, and a quiet strength most people overlooked. She saw what others refused to see. She heard what others ignored. And when the moment came, she chose not comfort but courage. And Kimiko Hayashi, she was a billionaire, yes. But that night, she was also a woman being spoken over, underestimated, and reduced to a stereotype. Her power wasn't in her money. It was in her composure, her discipline, and her choice to wait, not for the right deal, but for the right people. Both women faced a room that tried to define them by their silence. But in the end, they redefined that room. The truth is, most people don't see what's right in front of them. They see a title, a skin tone, a job description. They assume, they categorize, they move on. But the world changes when someone stops and really listens. So, here's the takeaway. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Never ignore the person clearing your table, answering your call, or sitting silently at the far end of a meeting room. You have no idea what they know or what they're capable of. And if you are one of those quiet ones, if you've ever felt invisible, undervalued, overlooked, know this. Your voice matters. Your presence matters. And one day, when it counts most, the world will finally hear you. This was a black story, but it's also a human story. If this moment meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone you've overlooked or someone who once stood up for you, share it. Let it ripple. Let someone else hear it. And if you want more stories like this, true stories that challenge how we see each other, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we're not done telling them. Not even close.